across the room like a dare, and the
That's
crowd
easy
laughed right
money.
on cue. Bianca stood at the center of the mat, one hand on her hip, the other pointing toward the back row, where
Figure
a
it out
black man
together,
sat
okay?
quietly with a small boy beside him.
Okay.
The man wore a faded work shirt and scuffed boots, the kind of clothes that said long hours and early mornings. He looked like every other tired father who had wandered into the wrong place on a Friday night, and that was exactly why she chose him. Nobody in that room objected. Nobody stepped forward. The crowd was already leaning in, already smiling, already certain they knew exactly how this was going to end. And the man in the back row, the one she had just pointed at in front of everyone, looked at his son, then looked at the mat, and said nothing at all. What happened next, nobody in that building was prepared for. If stories like this are your thing, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Marcus Johnson had a system for Friday nights, and it never changed. He picked Darius up from the after-school program by 5:30, stopped at the corner store for a bottle of grape juice and a bag of pretzels, and had dinner on the table before 7. After dishes, Darius did his reading while Marcus reviewed the week's invoices from the landscaping crew he ran 3 days out of 4. By 9, the boy was in bed. By 9:15, the apartment was quiet. It was not a glamorous life, but it was a steady one, and Marcus had learned the hard way that steady was worth more than most people realized. The exception to the system was the third Friday of the month when Darius had his junior martial arts class at the Riverside Community Center. Marcus always stayed for the full session, sitting on the folding chairs along the wall, with the other parents watching his son move through drills with the focused expression of a child who took everything seriously. Darius had been training for 2 years, and Marcus could see the discipline in him, the way he listened to instruction and repeated movements until they felt natural. That part Marcus understood. The repetition, the patience, the understanding that real skill lived in the fundamentals, not the flashy stuff. Tonight was different. The community center was hosting an open showcase, local schools bringing their best students, a few guest demonstrations, and apparently some kind of open challenge segment at the end. Darius had been asking about it for 3 weeks straight, and Marcus had eventually run out of reasons to say no. He found them seats in the back row, handed his son the pretzels, and settled in with the quiet resignation of a man who had agreed to sit through something he did not particularly need to see. The first hour was fine. Kids performing forms, a demonstration by a local judo club, a group of teenagers doing board breaks that made the crowd cheer louder than the skill probably warranted. Marcus watched, clapped when it seemed appropriate, and checked his phone twice. Darius barely moved beside him, completely absorbed, his eyes tracking every technique with the intensity of someone cataloging information for later use. Marcus looked at his son's face and felt the particular warmth that came with watching a child care deeply about something. Then Bianca stepped onto the mat, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. She was introduced by a man with a microphone as the regional women's full-contact champion, a 3-time gold medalist at state-level tournaments, and the head instructor of a school called Apex Martial Arts, located about 2 miles from where they were sitting. She was in her early 30s, athletic and precise in the way that serious competitors always were, and she carried herself with the absolute comfort of someone who had never once doubted her place at the center of a room. The crowd responded to her the way crowds always responded to confidence, with immediate, uncritical enthusiasm. What followed was a series of challenge matches she had clearly done before. A young man from another school went first, and lasted about 40 seconds before she swept his legs and pinned him to the mat with her knee at his shoulder. The crowd loved it. The young man laughed it off, which was gracious of him. A second volunteer, slightly older, made it closer to 2 minutes before a combination he never saw coming put him down. Bianca moved through both matches with clean efficiency, taking time between exchanges to explain her techniques to the audience, like a professor walking through a lecture which the crowd ate up completely. What the crowd did not know, what the showmanship was carefully designed to obscure, was that Bianca's school was in trouble. The rent on Apex Martial Arts was due in 18 days, enrollment had dropped by 1/3 over the past semester, and tonight's showcase was not just a performance. It was an audition. She needed new students, and new students came from visible wins in front of large crowds. Every match she had won tonight was a piece of advertising, and she needed one more. A good one. A convincing one, the kind that made parents in the audience think about signing their kids up on Monday morning. Marcus was scanning her footwork not out of competitive interest, just the automatic habit of a man who had spent years assessing movement when he noticed that she was searching the crowd between matches, not looking for the next challenger exactly, looking for the right one. There was a calculation in her eyes that the showmanship was designed to obscure, and Marcus recognized it because he had used it himself in contexts she would never understand. When her gaze landed on him, he saw the moment she made her decision. He was the largest person in the back row, visibly working class by his clothes, sitting quietly with a small boy. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a prop. And from where she was standing with a crowd already warm and a demonstration to close out a prop was exactly what the moment called for. "How about you?" Bianca said into the microphone, pointing directly at Marcus. "Big guy in the back. You want to show your son something to remember." The crowd turned. Darius looked up at his father. Marcus kept his expression neutral and shook his head once the small, definitive gesture of a man who meant it. "Come on," Bianca said, and her voice carried the easy warmth of someone who had learned to perform generosity in public. "No pressure, just for fun. I'll even go easy on you." The crowd laughed, and a few people turned back to look at Marcus with the expectant energy of an audience that had already decided he would say yes. Marcus did not find it funny, but he understood the mechanics of the moment well enough to know that arguing would only make it worse. He shook his head again, and this time he held Bianca's gaze long enough to communicate that the answer was final. Bianca did not accept final answers from people who hadn't earned the right to give them. She walked to the edge of the mat, closer to the crowd, and when she spoke again, the microphone caught just enough of her voice to carry. "Scared," she said, and the single word landed in the room like a small explosion, detonating just enough laughter to fill every corner. Darius made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Marcus glanced at his son and saw the boy's jaw tighten not with embarrassment, but with something older and quieter, the specific kind of hurt that children feel when the world disrespects someone they love. Marcus had tried to raise his son without teaching him that pride was something to protect at any cost, but he had also never taught him that dignity was something to surrender without cause. Bianca turned back to the audience and lifted the microphone. "Tell you what," she said, her voice bright with performance. "I'll make it interesting. Sir, what's your son's name?" The question was a trap dressed as friendliness. Marcus recognized it immediately. The crowd was already looking at Darius, who had gone very still beside his father with the expression of a child who understood more about what was happening than adults usually gave children credit for. Darius did not say anything. He looked at his father with an expression that carried no demand and no panic, just a question open and honest, asking nothing except what Marcus was willing to answer. Marcus sat with that look for 3 full seconds. Then he stood up. The crowd noise shifted immediately, a surge of anticipation, a few scattered cheers, the kind of energy that forms when a room full of people gets exactly what it was hoping for. Marcus took the pretzel bag from Darius's hands, set it carefully on the seat beside the boy, and said, "Stay here," in a voice that was calm and absolute. Then he moved down the aisle toward the mat with the unhurried stride of a man who had decided something and was now simply executing it. Bianca smiled as he approached, the confident smile of someone who had already written the ending. She gestured toward the center of the mat with a small, welcoming sweep of her hand. "Welcome up," she said. Marcus stepped onto the mat and turned to face her. He did not smile. He did not posture. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his weight distributed evenly, which was not a fighting stance in any formal sense, but was not nothing either. Bianca registered the posture for exactly half a second, then dismissed it as amateur instinct, and turned back to the crowd. "All right, everybody," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying the easy authority of a woman in complete control of the room. "Let's give him a hand before I humble him." The crowd obliged. Marcus stood in the noise and said nothing. At the back of the row, Darius sat with the pretzel bag on the seat beside him, watching his father's stillness, with an expression nobody there was paying attention to, the expression of a boy who knew something the rest of the room did not. Bianca handed the microphone to the MC and rolled her shoulders. She moved into her stance with the smooth, practiced motion of someone who had done this 10,000 times, feet positioned wide, hands up, weight slightly forward. It was a good stance. Clean, athletic, built for competition. She looked at Marcus across the mat with the steady confidence of a champion, and what she saw was a big man in work clothes who was standing slightly wrong and breathing through his nose. What she did not see, what none of them could see, was the part of Marcus Johnson that he had spent 4 years trying to leave behind, the part that had operated in places with no referees and no tap-outs, the part that had learned to read a room not for entertainment value, but for threat assessment. The part that was currently running a quiet automatic inventory of exits, distances, and angles out of pure habit, while the man it belonged to stood completely still and waited for whatever came next. Bianca studied him for a moment across the mat, and for the first time all evening, something almost imperceptible moved through her expression. Not doubt exactly, but the faint instinctive awareness that something about this particular moment was not matching the pattern she expected. She had challenged a lot of volunteers over the years. They all reacted the same way, nervous, eager, performative, already imagining how the story would sound when they told it later. This man was not doing any of those things. He was simply standing there looking at her with dark, even eyes that held no fear and no excitement and no performance of any kind. It lasted only a second. Then the crowd cheered again, and Bianca let the sound carry her back into the role she knew how to play. She had a reputation to protect students watching from the 3rd row and rent due in 18 days. Whatever this man had going on behind those eyes, she had handled bigger and she had handled faster, and tonight was not the night for uncertainty. She moved forward. Marcus watched her come and did not move a muscle. At the back of the row, Darius wrapped both hands around the armrests of his folding chair and held on. Bianca came in fast, the way she always did against unfamiliar opponents, an aggressive opening combination designed less to land clean and more to read how a person moved under pressure. A jab to test the distance, a low kick to check the reaction, then a quick lateral step to see which direction he favored. It was intelligent fighting, the kind built from years of competition, and against every other volunteer she had faced on this kind of night, it had told her everything she needed to know within the first 10 seconds. Marcus slipped the jab by moving his head exactly far enough and no further. He absorbed the low kick on his outer thigh without so much as shifting his weight. When she stepped laterally, he turned with her, maintaining the same distance between them as if the space itself were fixed. He did not counter. He did not react with surprise or adrenaline or the kind of stiff telegraphed response that untrained people defaulted to when something fast came at their face. He simply adjusted, absorbed, and waited, and the whole sequence happened so quietly that most of the crowd missed what it meant. What the crowd saw was a big man taking hits and not falling down, which they interpreted as stubbornness or luck. They laughed, a little encouraged by Bianca's composed expression, which said clearly that she was managing the situation and that the outcome was never in question. She threw a sharper combination jab cross body kick with more committed weight behind it, working now with genuine intent rather than pure assessment. The cross caught Marcus on the shoulder. The body kick landed against his forearm, which he had moved into position without any visible urgency, the deflection so economical it barely registered as a block. The crowd began to cheer harder, reading the action as a dominant performance by Bianca and a stubborn but futile resistance by the big man who should have known better. A few people near the front called out encouragement to her by name. One of her students, a teenager in a gray hoodie sitting 3 rows from the mat, shouted something that made the people around him laugh. Bianca moved with the energy of the room behind her, and she was good enough that the energy was warranted. Her technique was clean, her timing was excellent, and she was making it look exactly as effortless as she needed it to look. Near the side wall, largely unnoticed, a thick-necked man in his mid-50s stood with his arms crossed and watched in complete silence. He had arrived early and taken that position before the first match, and he had not moved from it since. He was not cheering. He was not smiling. He was watching Marcus the way someone watched a thing they were trying to identify carefully without rushing to a conclusion. In the back row, Darius had not moved from his chair. He was watching with both hands still wrapped around the armrests, the pretzel bag untouched beside him. His expression was different from the crowd's. Where they saw a man absorbing punishment, he saw something else. Something in the angle of his father's shoulders and the quality of his stillness that he had no words for yet, but recognized the way children recognize things that are true before they can explain why. Bianca reset and came forward with her signature combination, the one she had closed every match with tonight. A feint to the left, a committed right hook to draw the guard, then a sweep kick aimed at the back of the lead leg, followed immediately by a standing arm lock. She had landed it 4 times in the last 3 weeks, twice in competition, and twice in this exact kind of demonstration. It was the combination that ended things, and she threw it now with the full weight of her confidence behind it. Marcus stepped inside it. Not away from it. Not around it. He stepped directly into the pocket of the combination inside the arc of the hook before it could generate force, and the sweep kick caught nothing but air because his lead leg had already moved. His left hand came over her extended arm at the elbow, not a grab, just a redirect 2 fingers and a palm guiding rather than stopping, and Bianca felt her own momentum carry her forward and down in a direction she had not chosen. She got a foot under herself and recovered, but the recovery cost her a full step backward, and the arm lock position she had set up was completely gone. She stood 3 feet back from where she had started and looked at Marcus across the mat. He had not moved from the spot where he was standing. He was looking at her with the same even unreadable expression he had worn since the moment he stepped onto the mat. No satisfaction in it, no performance, just attention. The crowd took a moment to catch up to what had happened, and when they did, the sound in the room changed. The laughter dropped out of it. The cheering became something more uncertain, the enthusiasm of a crowd that had been telling itself one story and had just been handed a piece of information that did not fit. Near the sidewall, the thick-necked man uncrossed his arms. Bianca registered the shift in the room the way all experienced competitors registered changes in momentum, immediately and physically, a tightening across the chest that had nothing to do with exertion. She had been in enough matches to know when a crowd turned, and she had been in enough difficult moments to know that the correct response was to push through rather than acknowledge what had shifted. She came forward again faster this time, and the performance aspect of her movement was almost entirely gone. This was not demonstration anymore. Her students were watching. Her name was on a banner above the door of a school that needed to survive the next 18 days, and the man standing across from her had just made her look like she did not know what she was doing in front of everyone she had come here to impress. She threw hard, and she threw fast, pushing the pace beyond what she had used against anyone else tonight, and for a stretch of 30 seconds it was genuinely one-sided. Marcus gave ground, moving backward in a controlled retreat that kept him just outside her most effective range, and the crowd read the retreat as desperation and came back to her side with renewed noise. 2 of her students in the 3rd row stood up. The teenager in the gray hoodie was on his feet yelling, and the room was loud again in the way she needed it to be. But Marcus was not retreating because he was losing. He was retreating because he was measuring. In the brief intervals between exchanges, the fractions of a second while Bianca reset her feet or drew breath, something was happening behind Marcus's eyes that had nothing to do with the gym or the crowd or the Friday night showcase at the Riverside Community Center. It was not memory exactly. It was closer to the activation of a layer of his nervous system that had been deliberately dormant for 4 years, a layer that did not think in terms of points or technique or what the crowd was seeing. It processed distance timing, structural vulnerabilities, and optimal response windows with the cold efficiency of something that had been trained past the point where conscious thought was fast enough to be useful. He was not trying to access it. He was trying to keep it contained. The restraint was costing him, and the bruise forming along his left forearm where he had taken 2 hard kicks in succession was the evidence of that cost. Every time the instinct surfaced, and he pushed it back down, he absorbed something he would not have absorbed if he had simply let the training run. He was making a choice over and over to stay inside the version of this fight that did not end with someone going to the hospital. Bianca hit him with a clean elbow strike to the side of the head that landed harder than either of them expected, and Marcus felt the familiar compression of impact, that flat white instant that preceded pain. He took 2 steps back. The crowd erupted. Bianca pressed the advantage immediately, the correct competitive decision, the thing any trained fighter did when they hurt someone. She came in with full commitment, her best and heaviest combination, the kind of sequence that ended fights at the regional level, and would end this one too if she landed it clean. She was fast. She was technically sound. She wanted this to be over, and she put everything she had into making it so. Marcus caught the first strike on his forearm, redirected the second across his body, and the third, a straight right hand aimed at his jaw, he moved away from by the exact distance required, no more, so that it passed his face close enough that Bianca felt the air of her own miss. The momentum of her committed strike pulled her weight forward, and in that fraction of a second, while her balance was ahead of her feet, Marcus's right hand found her collar and his left hand found her sleeve, and Bianca felt the floor come up at an angle she had not agreed to. She caught herself on one knee, which was good instinct, but her arm was already controlled and her posture was already broken, and the position she found herself in had no good exits. She tried to roll out of it, and Marcus followed the roll, maintaining control without increasing pressure, patient, in a way that was more unsettling than aggression would have been. She pushed back against the control and felt it absorb her push, rather than resist it like trying to move water. The room was very quiet. Darius had both feet flat on the floor, now leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching his father's hands with an expression of absolute recognition. The face of a child seeing something he had always suspected confirmed in real time. Bianca understood in the particular clarity that comes only when the body has run out of options that she was not in a competition anymore. She did not know what she was in. She only knew that the man controlling her arm had not raised his voice, had not changed his expression, had not wasted a single movement in the last 60 seconds, and was waiting for her to reach the same conclusion he had apparently already reached before she did. She had come into this match believing she was the most dangerous person on the mat. She was no longer certain that was true, and the uncertainty arrived not as a thought, but as something colder and more physical, the specific recognition of a body that has finally processed what the mind was too confident to consider earlier. Marcus held the position for 2 more seconds, then adjusted his grip in a way that communicated without words or force that the next movement available to her was the one she chose to make. She could keep fighting. He was not going to stop her from doing that. But he was also not going to pretend, and she was not going to pretend that the outcome of that choice was unclear. Bianca stopped moving. The room stayed quiet, in the way that rooms only go quiet when something has happened that nobody has the right words for yet. Bianca was on one knee with her arm controlled and her balance broken, and Marcus was beside her in a position that required no force to maintain because the geometry of it had already made force irrelevant. Nobody was cheering. The MC had lowered the microphone to his side. The teenager in the gray hoodie who had been on his feet 30 seconds ago yelling for Bianca was sitting back down with the careful movements of someone trying not to draw attention to himself. Marcus released the control hold in a single clean motion and stepped back, giving Bianca the space to stand without making a production of it. He did not offer a hand up. He did not step away to the far side of the mat or turn toward the crowd. He simply moved back 2 steps and stood giving her room to collect herself on her own terms, which was the only kind of dignity available to her now, and which he extended without comment or ceremony. Bianca got to her feet. She took a breath, and then another, and straightened her uniform with the automatic gestures of a person buying time for their mind to catch up to what their body had just experienced. She turned to face Marcus, and the expression on her face was not the one she had worn at the beginning of the night, the composed, camera-ready confidence of a champion at work. What was on her face now was simpler and harder, the expression of someone standing in the specific wreckage of an assumption they had built their entire evening on. The crowd was reading her face and learning something from it. She looked at Marcus across the short distance between them and said loudly enough to carry, "You win." 2 words flat and undecorated because she was too honest a competitor to dress it up as anything other than what it was. A few people in the crowd applauded, uncertain at first trying to figure out what they were celebrating, and then more people joined and the applause became genuine because the room recognized that what they had just witnessed was real, in a way the earlier matches had not been. Marcus gave a single nod, that was all. Bianca looked at him for another moment with something working behind her eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment exactly, but the active and uncomfortable process of revising a judgment she had made too quickly and too publicly. She had looked at a man in a faded work shirt and decided she already knew everything worth knowing about him. The cost of that decision was standing in front of her calm and unhurt and completely uninterested in making her feel worse than she already did. Before she could say anything else, a sound cut through the settling noise of the crowd, quick footsteps on the gym floor. And then Darius was there, crossing the mat at a run and wrapping both arms around his father's midsection with the full-body commitment that only children and people in genuine relief could manage. Marcus caught him with one arm, the other hand, coming up to the back of the boy's head in a gesture so automatic it barely registered as movement. Darius pressed his face against his father's chest and said something low, but the gym had gone quiet enough that the people in the first few rows heard it clearly. "I thought you weren't going to do that anymore," the boy said. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Marcus looked down at his son, and something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that, the expression of a man confronted with evidence that the people closest to him had always seen him more clearly than he had managed himself. He put his hand on the back of Darius's head and held it there without saying anything immediately, because the moment did not require words from him, and he had never been a man who filled silences just to fill them. The thick-necked man near the side wall took 2 steps forward from his position. He had the particular kind of stillness in his body that came from having once been very capable of violence and having since made peace with that fact, and he had been watching the entire match with the focused expression of someone doing an assessment rather than watching a show. He looked at Marcus the way someone looked at a thing they had finally finished identifying. "Where did you serve?" the man said. His voice was direct and without ceremony, the question of someone who already knew the shape of the answer and was only asking to confirm it. Marcus looked at the man. Something passed between them in that look, a recognition, a shared language that had nothing to do with words, and then Marcus answered in the same register he had used for everything else that night, quiet, even completely unembellished. "Naval Special Warfare," Marcus said. "Separated 4 years ago." The man gave a short nod, the nod of someone receiving information that confirmed what they had already concluded. He said nothing further, but he did not look away, and the respect in his expression was the specific, unperformative kind that only moved in one direction. The MC, who had been standing at the edge of the mat holding his microphone against his thigh, repeated the words into the open air without quite meaning to. Naval Special Warfare. He said it the way people said things when the information was too large to process silently. And then the crowd caught it, and the understanding moved through the room in the way that understanding moves through crowds, not all at once, but in a wave person to person, the murmur rising and changing texture as people turned to confirm with the person next to them what they thought they had just heard. A Navy SEAL. The man in the faded work shirt who had sat in the back row with his son and a bag of pretzels and had declined twice to stand up right up until the moment that declining was no longer the right answer, had spent years operating in the most demanding conditions the military could design. The man Bianca had pointed at and called easy money. Bianca stood in the center of the mat and heard the room process this information, and the experience of it was not what she might have predicted. She had expected somewhere in the back of her mind that finding out who Marcus was would feel like an excuse, something she could point to that explained the outcome without requiring her to sit with it. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Because it wasn't his background that had beaten her. It was the fact that she had looked at a stranger and decided in 3 seconds that she understood everything about him. The background only explained the mechanism. The lesson was about the assumption. She looked at her students in the third row, 3 of them ranging from about 12 to 17, watching her with the careful attention of young people trying to learn something from a situation their teacher had not planned. She had taught them to read opponents, to assess and respond, to never underestimate reach and weight and experience. She had not taught them not formally about the things she had just demonstrated at her own expense, the way confidence could become a blindfold if you wore it too long without taking it off. She would think about how to say that to them later. For now, she simply met their eyes one by one and held each gaze long enough to communicate that she was not going to pretend the lesson had not happened. Marcus adjusted his jacket on his shoulders and steered Darius toward the exit with a hand on the boy's shoulder. They moved through the edge of the crowd, and the people near the aisle shifted to make room in the instinctive way that crowds make room for things they suddenly understood differently. Nobody stopped them. Nobody called out for a photograph or a handshake or any of the things people sought from exceptional moments. The room mostly watched in the collective held breath of an audience that had not yet figured out how to return to ordinary behavior. Near the door, Darius looked up at his father with the question he had been holding since the moment Marcus stood up from his chair. "Are you sorry you did it?" the boy asked. His voice was not anxious. It was the genuine, clear-eyed curiosity of a child who trusted the answer to be honest. Marcus considered the question for the length of 3 steps. He was a man who had learned the hard way that the answer you gave quickly was